Again, on Wednesday nights, we're looking at the Judges. And so Judges chapter number 3, and we're looking at verse number 31. And there's not a lot said about this guy. There's not a lot said about this guy. Now, I don't have to call anybody in the nursery, right? No? Nobody's here. Yeah. Nobody just wants to go to the nursery and sit in there? So you can listen through the phone? There's not a lot of, like I said, not a lot said about this guy. Judges chapter 3 and verse number 31. This is the only verse that is about this judge. And here's what it says. And after him, and of course the him there is Ehud. We looked at him last week, the left-handed guy that stuck a dagger into Eglon's fat. So much so that, 2 feet of dagger went in and he couldn't pull it out. So after him was Shamgar, the son of Anath, which slew of the Philistines 600 men with an ox goad, and he also delivered Israel. There's just not a lot there about this guy. So let's be dismissing a word. No, I'm kidding. There is another passage that mentions Shamgar, and we're going to go there in just a minute. But I want to point out some things. Like I said, we don't really know anything about the man. There's not anything significant about him. There's not really anything significant about his dad either, Anath. But he slew 600 Philistines. At this time, the children of Israel, or the nation of Israel, was starting to be under the oppression of the Philistines. And the Philistines, of course, they're going to be bothering Israel all the way through Solomon's time, and then really past that. And so Judges, we have the book of Judges, and then 1 Samuel, which is Saul's kingship, 2 Samuel, which is David's kingship, and Solomon's kingship. And then we go through the Chronicles, and then we go into the historical books and all of that. The Philistines are just a pain in the Israelites behind. And some believe that Palestine, the word Palestine, comes from the Philistines. And so they're a pain today. And so this would be the beginning of the Philistines' oppression of Israel. But it says Shamgar slew him with an ox goad. Now, an ox goad. An ox goad. An ox goad. If you ever see a shepherd, and this would be not a high-tech shepherd, but if you ever see a shepherd with a stick and has a pointy end on it, and he's just jabbing them, that's an ox goad. And literally, and I went into the Hebrew just to make sure there wasn't anything significant about this, literally it's an ox goad, it's the ox goad, or with the ox goad for the ox. Literally, that's what that whole phrase says. When it just says here, with an ox goad, it's with the ox goad for an ox, or of an ox. But that's all it is a pointy stick. And so Shamgar would have been a shepherd of oxen, and he would want them to get, to move. He'd just poke them with a sharp stick, and then they would go where he wanted to go. It's a stick with a point. He had a little pocket knife, his Swiss Army knife, way back in Judges. Put a point on a stick, and that's what an ox goad was. And so he slew 600 Philistines who were well armed and army men of valor. He slew 600 of them, being a shepherd with a pointy stick. And he also delivered Israel. Well, let's take a look at another passage where Shamgar is mentioned, and we'll get a little more information. You're in Judges chapter 3. Go to Judges chapter 5. Now, our next judges that we're going to look at, there's two of them, is Deborah and Barak. And like I said, we're going to be looking at them next time. And it'll probably take a couple of Wednesdays because they're going to start in chapter number 4. And chapter number 5 is still speaking of Deborah and Barak. And so in Judges chapter 5 and verse number 1, you see, we're getting the context. Then sang Deborah and Barak, the son of Abinoam, on that day, saying, Praise ye the Lord for the avenging of Israel. When the people willingly offered themselves, Hear, O ye kings, give ear, O ye princes, even I will sing unto the Lord. I will sing praises to the Lord God of Israel. Lord, when thou wentest out of Seir, when thou marchest out of the field of Edom, the earth trembled and the heavens dropped. The clouds also dropped water. The mountains melted from before the Lord, even that Sinai from before the Lord God of Israel. Now, verse number 6. In the days of Shamgar, the son of Anath, in the days of Jael. Now, Jael is going to be the one that's going to kill the enemy with Deborah and Barak. So in the days of Shamgar and in the days of Jael, the highways were unoccupied and the travelers walked through byways. They were so oppressed by the Philistines that there was nobody that was able to travel on the main roads from city to city. So there would be main roads that would go from, say, Jerusalem to Galilee. And they were so oppressed by the Philistines that they couldn't walk on that main road, that they had to walk on the byways. So they would take the back roads, we would know them as back roads, or they would take paths or make paths. And so that's what that's saying there. So this is a little more about the oppression of the Philistines. And then it continues on in verse 7. The inhabitants of the village ceased. They ceased in Israel until that I, Deborah, arose, that I arose a mother in Israel. What that's talking about is everybody had to move from their little villages into big towns that had walls around them. So the Philistines were harassing the children of Israel so much that they had to leave their villages, they had to leave their tents, and they had to move into the city that had walls around them. So now we see two things here. You couldn't openly walk on the highways, and you couldn't live in your village. You had to live in the main cities. Then, verse number 8. They chose new gods. Then was war in the gates. Was there a shield or a spear seen among 40,000 in Israel? So the third thing that we see here about the oppression of the Philistines is they disarmed the people. So the question here was, could you find one shield or one sword among 40,000 Israelites? And the answer was no. So when an oppressor wants to exert his oppression, his authority, his power, you know what he's going to do? He's going to disarm the masses. Does that sound like anything? Does that sound familiar? You know, I wrote in my notes here something we should consider with all of these gun control laws. Something that we should consider. Yeah, the elites can have armed protection, but you plebes can't. You common people can't. And so, when oppressors come, and this has been from way back, Judges is way back, when oppressors come, they disarm the citizens. Was there found a shield or a sword among 40,000 Israelites? So it's no wonder that poor little Shamgar only had an ox goad. He had to make his own weapon to slay these 600 Philistines. So again, in Judges chapter 5, we just get a little bit more information in this song that Deborah and Barak are singing, And they refer back to the time of Shamgar and a little bit about what was going on by the oppression of the Philistines, that they couldn't walk openly, they couldn't live in their own village, and they were all disarmed. And it's amazing when we go back to Judges chapter 3 and verse number 31, the amazing thing here is the fact that he killed 600 Philistine soldiers with a pointy stick. Do you think that stick could have broke? Do you think that maybe those Philistine soldiers had armor on and it could have dulled his little point on his little wooden stick? So who do you think really helped Shamgar and that ox goad? It was God. It was God. Again, we're not given a whole lot here. We ended the story, the account with Ehud. Ehud judged the Israel, was it 80 years? Judges chapter 3. Moab was in the land of 80 years. In verse number 30, you can see that. Right after the 80 years, this thing with Shamgar happens. And we're not given a time frame. We're not told how long Shamgar was the judge. We're not told how long that he protected Israel. What we are told is the Philistine oppression began and Shamgar took care of it for the moment with a pointy stick. Is there anybody else in the scriptures that killed a bunch of Philistines with a non-conventional weapon? Who can you think of? Samson killed 1,000 of them with the jawbone of an ass. I read about the mighty men of David. The first 3 of them. The account is one slew so many that the sword clave to his hand. He couldn't even open his hand. He'd held on to that for so long and he killed so many that he couldn't even let his hand loose. The other one killed him with his spear. The other one protected a bean field. By the way, that's what lentils are. So the Lord used these unconventional ways. Now, a sword and a spear, that's not an unconventional weapon, but 1 against 1,000? You know the Lord's in that. 1 against 600 with a pointy stick? We know the Lord was in that. And so again, tonight, just looking at Shamgar, this one judge, I didn't want to just glaze over him because he only gets 1 verse in the book of Judges. But, you know, how many of you have killed 600 Philistines with a pointy stick? Anybody? Yeah, we ought to not glaze over his verse. Any questions about anything we saw tonight with Shamgar? Yes, sir.